The delegates from 100 species occupied tiered seats, their varied forms creating a kaleidoscope of movement as murmurs filled the air. At the heart of the room stood General Cathor, his battle-scarred armor a stark contrast to the pristine grandeur of the hall. His presence commanded attention, not just for his towering physique, but for the aura of a warrior who had seen horrors others feared to imagine. Chairman Zolvax, a wiry figure with elongated limbs and a perpetual sneer etched into his reptilian face, banged the ceremonial staff on the floor, silencing the assembly. "We gather here under grave circumstances," he intoned, his voice sharp and calculated. "Humanity, a species of mere primitives a century ago, now rivals some of the oldest powers in this council. Their technological growth is unprecedented, their influence spreading like a plague. Shall we wait for them to supplant us? Or do we act decisively?" The room erupted into debate. Some delegates voiced agreement, their voices laced with fear and disdain for the upstart humans. Others called for restraint, citing humanity's enigmatic nature and unpredictable strategies. Among the latter was Ambassador Arek, a younger delegate from the Valruin, whose iridescent skin shifted hues as he spoke. "Chairman, might I remind you that humanity's actions have, thus far, been defensive? They have shown no intent to invade council space unprovoked. A preemptive strike could ignite a conflict we are ill-prepared to face." Zolvax scoffed. "Your naivety, Araek, is precisely why this council hesitates to act when boldness is required. Humans do not play by the rules. They do not honor treaties or respect traditions. Their nature is chaos. Chaos is not their weakness," a deep voice interrupted. The assembly turned to Cathor, whose glowing amber eyes surveyed the room. He took a deliberate step forward, the heavy clang of his boots echoing in the hushed chamber. "It is their strength." Zolvax's gaze narrowed. "General Cathor, you speak as though you admire these creatures." Cathor's jaw tightened. "Admiration is not the word. Respect, perhaps. Fear, certainly." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I have faced them in battle. I have seen what they are capable of. To underestimate them would be our greatest folly." Ark leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "General, would you elaborate? The council has heard rumors of your campaign on the frontier, but not the details." Cathor hesitated, the memories seemingly clawing at his resolve. His voice, when he spoke, was low but unwavering. 3 cycles ago, my forces were stationed near the periphery, tasked with securing a resource-rich system newly annexed by the Council. We encountered resistance, a small human contingent. Their numbers were laughable, their equipment inferior. It should have been an effortless victory. Zolvax smirked. "And yet, here you stand, warning us of their supposed threat. What went wrong, General?" Cathor's gaze locked onto the chairman. "Everything." The room grew deathly silent. Delegates leaned closer, their varied forms casting distorted shadows on the chamber walls. Cathor continued, his tone grave. "They fought unlike any enemy we had faced. Their tactics defied logic, their strategies unpredictable. At first, we believed their actions were born of desperation, feigned retreats, erratic offensives. But we soon realized these were deliberate moves, calculated to exploit our overconfidence. They used the terrain as if it were an extension of themselves, blending into it, disappearing, only to strike where we least expected." Araek's voice cut through the heavy air. "And their morale? Surely such methods would tax their troops." Cathor shook his head. "Their morale was unshakable. They thrive under pressure, adapt in ways that defy reason. Their soldiers acted as one, as if driven by an unspoken unity we could not disrupt. Even when we had them surrounded, they did not panic. They did not falter." Zolvax dismissed him with a wave. "You speak as though they are invincible, General. Yet they are but flesh and blood." Cathor stepped closer to the chairman's pedestal, his amber eyes burning with intensity. "Flesh and blood, yes. But their minds, their spirit, these are their true weapons. Weapons we cannot predict, cannot counter. I lost thousands of my best soldiers to a force 1/10 our size. Tell me, Chairman, how do you propose to act decisively against such an enemy without understanding what you face? The tension in the chamber became palpable. Zolvax, visibly unsettled, searched for a retort but found none. Ariak broke the silence. General, your testimony is invaluable, but the Council must decide. Do we confront humanity or seek to understand them? Cathor's gaze swept over the assembly. I do not advocate for war, nor do I advocate for peace. I only urge caution. Humans are not like us. To provoke them is to invite a storm we may not survive. The chairman, his confidence visibly shaken, banged his staff again. Enough for now. The council shall deliberate. As the delegates began murmuring among themselves, Cathor turned and walked out of the chamber, his heavy steps echoing like a distant drumbeat. Behind him, Zolvax's eyes gleamed with something darker than doubt, ambition. The room dimmed slightly as a shadow passed over the council's great dome. In its wake, the lingering echoes of Cathor's warning seemed to reverberate, unheeded yet undeniably real. The icy winds of Lathro's prime howled across the barren plains, a desolate expanse of jagged rocks and frost-covered terrain. General Cathor stood atop a ridgeline, his sharp gaze sweeping over the battlefield below. His forces, a battalion of elite Dravik warriors, moved with disciplined precision, their exoskeletal armor gleaming under the pale light of a distant sun. Ahead lay the human encampment, a haphazard cluster of prefabricated shelters and crude barricades. Cathor's second-in-command, Captain Vorlon, approached, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. General, their defenses are pitiful. A swift strike will crush them before they can muster a proper response. Cathor remained silent, studying the scene with the practiced eye of a seasoned warrior. Something about the humans' positioning troubled him. Their lines were too exposed, their camp seemingly vulnerable. Yet no distress signals had been intercepted, no signs of reinforcements detected. It was as if they wanted his forces to attack. "Patience, Vorlon," Cathor said at last, his voice low and measured. "Humans are cunning. They thrive on deception. We will not act until we understand their intent." Vorlon bristled, his pride wounded. "With respect, General, hesitation is not the way of the Dravik. Allow me to lead the vanguard. I will return with their commander's head." Cathor turned to face him, his amber eyes hard. "And if you walk into a trap, will your arrogance shield our forces from annihilation?" Before Vorlon could respond, a comms officer approached, bowing respectfully. "General, we've detected unusual activity near the southern ridge. It appears the humans are repositioning their troops." Cathor frowned. "How many?" "Less than a dozen, sir. A small contingent." Vorlon sneered. "Perhaps they've realized their folly and are preparing to flee." Cathor considered the report, his instincts prickling. "No, they're drawing us in. Ready the scouts. I want full reconnaissance of that ridge before we make a move." As the comms officer departed, Vorlon muttered under his breath, but obeyed the order. Cathor turned back to the battlefield, his mind racing. The humans' actions defied logic, but they were not fools. If they were willing to risk such an exposed position, they must have a strategy. Hours later, as the Dravik scouts relayed their findings, the first pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The human forces were not retreating, but had positioned themselves along a series of narrow canyons, a natural choke point that nullified the Dravik's numerical advantage. Worse, they had rigged the terrain with explosives, effectively turning the battlefield into a death trap. Cathor's respect for his enemy deepened. "Clever," he muttered. "They seek to lure us into overextending. But why show their hand so soon?" Before he could devise a counter-strategy, an alert blared through the comms. Human artillery had begun shelling the Dravik's forward positions, precise strikes that disrupted supply lines and communication hubs. The bombardment was relentless, sowing chaos among the ranks. Kathor immediately issued orders. Reinforce the supply lines. Deploy aerial units to locate their artillery positions. I want those weapons neutralized. But the humans anticipated this as well. As Dravik aircraft took to the skies, they encountered human fighter drones, sleek, unmanned machines armed with advanced targeting systems. The skies above Lathros Prime erupted into chaos as the drones outmaneuvered the larger Dravik crafts, cutting through them with surgical efficiency. Kathor clenched his fists, frustration mounting. Every move he made was countered with ruthless precision. The humans were not fighting to win a decisive battle. They were fighting to destabilize, to confound. They did not adhere to the honor-bound tactics of the Dravik, and therein lay their advantage. By the time night fell, the Dravik forces had been forced into defensive positions, their earlier confidence shattered. The human soldiers had vanished into the terrain, leaving behind only whispers and shadows. Kathor stood in his command tent, poring over maps and reports, searching for a way to turn the tide. They fight like ghosts, Vorlon growled, his earlier bravado replaced with unease. Where are their reinforcements? How do they sustain such precision with so few numbers? Kathor did not answer. He already knew the truth, though it was difficult to accept. The humans needed no reinforcements. Their adaptability, their willingness to exploit every weakness, made them a force far greater than their numbers suggested. The comms crackled to life, a human voice cutting through the static. It was calm, almost casual. "General Kathor," it said, "I am Commander Elias Grayson. I believe this is the part where we exchange pleasantries. But I'm afraid I've little time for that." Kathor's eyes narrowed. "You dare contact me directly, human? Have you no sense of decorum?" Grayson chuckled softly. "Decorum won't win this war, General. Strategy will. And I'd say we're doing quite well in that regard." Kathor's grip tightened on the edge of the table. "Do not mistake temporary victories for superiority, Commander. You are but a flicker against the might of the Dravik." "Perhaps," Grayson replied, "but sometimes a flicker is all it takes to ignite a wildfire. Sleep well, General. You'll need your rest." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Kathor staring at the comms unit, his thoughts a maelstrom of anger and respect. He turned to Vorlon, his voice colder than the winds outside. "Prepare the troops. Tomorrow, we take the fight to them." As Vorlon saluted and left, Kathor gazed out at the darkened battlefield, the faint glimmers of human movements just beyond reach. For the first time in his long career, he felt a sliver of doubt. The humans were not just opponents. They were something far more dangerous. And Kathor knew this was only the beginning. The war on Lathros Prime had become a brutal stalemate. For 2 weeks, General Kathor and his forces clashed with humanity's elusive troops, each engagement a series of costly counterattacks and retreats. The humans, using guerrilla tactics and psychological warfare, had managed to keep the Dravik off balance, rendering the superior alien numbers almost irrelevant. But now, in the hushed pre-dawn hours, Kathor knew that the time for hesitation was over. Inside his command tent, Kathor stood before a holographic map, his mind racing. The humans had drawn them into the canyons once more, where the terrain gave them the advantage. His forces had taken losses, but Kathor had one final gambit. He would use the humans' own tactics against them. "Captain Vorlon," Kathor called, his voice low but firm. Vorlon entered quickly, his demeanor still brimming with impatience. "What is your command, General?" "We are ready to move on the humans. Their defenses have weakened. This will be the final push." Kathor didn't respond immediately, his eyes tracing the shifting holographic readout of human movements. "Their defenses are not weakening, Captain. They are adapting." Vorlon's mandibles twitched in irritation. "Adapting? They've been running circles around us since the beginning. You've seen it. We can strike them now and end this war." Kathor's gaze turned cold, his voice hardening. "You think they're running from us? They're not afraid. They're preparing. Their command structure is far more advanced, than we initially believed. They've drawn us into a trap, Captain. Vorlon's eyes flickered with uncertainty. Then what is your plan, General? Cathor's lips curled into a grim smile. We do as they do. We stop chasing them and force them into the open. Meanwhile, far to the north, Major Leon Carter of the United Earth Forces was seated in a small command post, a concealed location deep within the canyon system. His fingers drummed lightly on the steel table in front of him. The constant hum of data streams a soothing rhythm amidst the tension. His mind was focused entirely on the battlefield ahead. Major, the Dravik have repositioned. They're moving into the eastern canyon, Sergeant Jensen reported, his voice tinged with concern. They're playing a defensive game now. I think they know we're up to something. Carter smiled grimly, leaning back in his chair. Of course they do. They're Dravik. They're not stupid, but they're predictable. The question is, will they bite? The room fell silent as the strategists and officers exchanged glances. They had spent days drawing the Dravik into this very position, carefully manipulating their movements. Carter's plan had been risky, pulling back to feign weakness, but it had worked. The Dravik will strike tomorrow, Carter continued, his tone confident. But they won't expect us to come to them. This time, we take the fight to them. The following day, the Dravik launched their attack. Hundreds of armored Dravik soldiers, led by Vorlon, surged forward into the eastern canyon, anticipating a final push to crush the human forces that had plagued them for so long. The terrain was treacherous, but Cathor had ordered the Dravik to advance quickly to avoid being drawn into another drawn-out conflict. The trap, however, was already set. As the Dravik forces descended into the canyon, they found their path blocked by a series of cleverly concealed barriers, walls of rock that had been rigged with explosives. The walls exploded in a series of controlled detonations, sending shockwaves through the Dravik ranks. The blast tore through their lines, and the soldiers reeled from the disorienting effect. As they struggled to regroup, a hail of fire from human sniper teams cut through the chaos, each shot finding its mark with eerie precision. Vorlon roared in fury, ordering his soldiers to return fire. But the canyon walls were now alive with traps, hidden mines, camouflaged turrets, and artillery strikes from human positions above. The Dravik were caught in a vice, surrounded on all sides. It was exactly what the humans had been waiting for. Retreat! Fall back! Vorlon bellowed, but it was too late. The humans were already closing in, cutting off escape routes with brutal efficiency. Cathor, watching from his command tent, felt the tide of battle shift. For the first time since the war began, he felt genuine fear. His forces were being routed, not by superior numbers, but by a level of cunning he had never anticipated. We'd been outmaneuvered, he muttered to himself, his heart heavy with the weight of realization. We're the ones being hunted now. In the canyon below, Carter stood at the head of his squad, surveying the battlefield through a pair of binoculars. His mind was already 2 steps ahead, calculating the next move. The Dravik were faltering, but the war was far from over. Major, the Dravik are retreating, Jensen said, his voice tight with excitement. They're in disarray. This is it. Carter's expression remained grim. Not yet. We're not done until they're off this planet entirely. He turned to his comm officer. Initiate Phase 2. Push them to the northern exit. They think they can escape. Let's make sure they don't. With the click of a button, the human forces mobilized in perfect synchronization, pushing forward with relentless precision. The Dravik were cornered now, caught between the crushing pressure of human tactics and the unforgiving terrain. Back at the Dravik command post, Cathor clenched his fists, the crushing weight of defeat heavy upon him. He had underestimated his enemy. No, not just his enemy, but the very essence of what made humanity dangerous. It wasn't their numbers, their technology, or even their fierce will to survive. It was their ability to adapt, to think and act in ways that shattered all expectations. They've turned the tide, General, Colonel Dracon said, his voice a mix of disbelief and resignation. We've lost control. The humans have forced us into a corner. Kothor's gaze was cold, his mind already calculating their next move. This is not over. We will retreat and regroup, but we will return stronger, and we will learn from this. The humans will not defeat us again. As the last Dravic forces began their retreat, Kothor turned to face his troops. He had lost the battle, but the war, he knew, was far from over. The Galactic Council chamber hummed with a low, dissonant murmur as Kothor strode in, his presence silencing the room. The once vibrant discussions of various delegates ceased abruptly as the general took his place before the exalted council members. His face, often impassive, now betrayed an unspoken weight of defeat, a weight he had never known before. The Dravic had suffered their first true loss at the hands of humanity, and it was a loss that reverberated across every corner of their fleet. Chairman Zolvax leaned forward, his cold eyes narrowing. General Kothor, it seems you've returned from the front lines sooner than expected. Tell us, how fares the Dravic campaign? Kothor's eyes flickered with restrained fury, the bitter taste of failure still fresh on his tongue. The campaign is lost, Chairman. The humans have routed us. Our forces are in disarray. The chamber erupted in chaos, voices shouting questions, demanding answers. Zolvax, unperturbed, banged his staff on the floor, calling for order. Silence! The chairman's voice rang out, carrying an air of authority. General, you are claiming that the Dravic have been defeated by a primitive species? Yes, Kothor replied, his tone unyielding. And I will explain why. With a deliberate motion, Kothor activated a holographic display of the battlefield. The canyon systems, the concealed explosives, and the precise strikes that had crippled his forces. The humans are not what we thought. They do not fight with brute strength or overwhelming numbers. They fight with intelligence. They fight with strategy that is beyond anything we anticipated, and they adapt to every move we make. Ambassador Ariek, still youthful and eager, was the first to speak. You speak as though they are a superior force. Surely, General, you exaggerate. The humans cannot be that much of a threat. Kothor's eyes narrowed, his patience wearing thin. I do not exaggerate. I have seen their tactics firsthand. The human mind is unlike any we have encountered. They are unpredictable, resourceful, and relentless. They do not yield. Zolvax's lips curled into a smirk. And you believe this warrants our full attention? You, General, have always been one for caution. But we are not in the business of mercy. We are in the business of power. Should we allow these humans to dictate our actions? Kothor's voice rang out, cold and commanding. You underestimate them at your own peril. If we continue to provoke them, we will face more than just small skirmishes. They will escalate. They are not bound by the same codes we follow. They will not hesitate to destroy us if given the chance. A ripple of unease spread to the council as the delegates exchanged uneasy glances. Zolvax, however, leaned back in his seat, tapping his clawed fingers together. And yet, they have not attacked the council. They've only defended themselves. What reason do we have to believe they will go beyond their borders? Their strategy is clear, Kothor replied, his voice like a growl. They will allow us to overstep. They will let us think we are in control, and then they will strike with precision. They have already proven this on Lathros Prime. And now, they are adapting faster than we are. Ambassador Ariek spoke again, this time with a note of concern. So, what do you propose we do, General? Retreat from the periphery? Abandon our plans to secure resources? Kothor's eyes locked onto Ariek's, and for a moment, the room felt as if the very air had thickened. We must not provoke them further. If we push them, we will find ourselves on the receiving end of a war we cannot win. They are not like us. They do not follow the same rules of engagement. Their unpredictability is their greatest weapon. The chairman stood up, his posture rigid, betraying his rising frustration. You speak of caution and restraint, General, But we cannot allow these humans to continue encroaching upon council space. If we do nothing, we show weakness. If we allow them to gain even more ground, they will embolden themselves. They must be stopped. Then we must learn from them. Cathor replied, his voice like steel. We must adapt. We must become as unpredictable as they are. There was silence. For a long moment, the council debated, their voices growing louder but no clearer. Some argued for further military action, others for diplomacy. Zolvax watched as his fellow delegates fell into their usual patterns, instinctively reaching for the quick, aggressive solution. But Cathor's words had struck a nerve. A few delegates, even Zolvax, began to understand that the situation had changed. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Zolvax spoke. We will not retreat, General, but neither will we act without caution. You are correct in one thing. The humans are unlike any enemy we have faced. We will need time to study them, to understand them, perhaps even to learn from them. Cathor nodded slowly, but inside, a storm of doubt raged. He had warned them, but he knew the Council's appetite for power would not be so easily quelled. A more dangerous phase of the war was inevitable, one where the human mind, its creativity, its ingenuity, would become the greatest weapon of all. The time to understand them is short, Cathor said, his voice low. We cannot afford to wait too long. If we do, it may be too late for all of us. Zolvax stared at him, his reptilian eyes narrowing. We shall see, General. We shall see. As Cathor left the chamber, he felt a familiar weight pressed down on him. The war was far from over, but the Council's response had only made the conflict more certain. The humans had shown their strength, but it was the Dravik who were about to learn the true meaning of unpredictability. The battle was no longer about resources or borders. It was about survival. And Cathor, despite his warning, feared that survival might be a goal even beyond his reach.